Hey, welcome financial professionals and advisors. I'm Rod Crandall. I'm Regional Vice President here at E4, welcoming you to The Brew. This is where we build relationships every week. Thank you for tuning in, and those of you that are joining us for the first time, we do like to start the Brewcast by celebrating today's national days. We have Human Rights Day today. Well, that should be a day every single day. And then we have the Dewey Decimal System Day. Boy, I haven't heard of a Dewey Decimal System in quite some time. Reminds me of that UHF movie with Weird Al Yankovic. So any of you who have seen that one, or go ahead and Google it, it's pretty funny. So again, welcome here today. This is the second in our series around legacy planning. And today we're going to be discussing why liquidity is very crucial inside of the estate planning process and how unexpected costs can quickly erode even the strongest financial plans. And so in working with wealth advisors the last 20 years and their clients, I often have wealth advisors that will indicate to me, hey, my client's fine because they're rich, right? Maybe they have $10 million. And that means they're fine relative to long-term care planning and maybe estate planning. Right. And to that statement, I generally will say to the advisor, well, your client may be rich, but are they liquid? Right. And there's a big difference. Right. And so will your client be okay? Well, the answer is, of course, they're going to be okay. Right. Because they've built a significant portfolio. Right. But it isn't always about what you grow or what you build. It's what you protect. And at death, you can have a number of transfer costs that people may not be thinking about. So first and foremost, if we're worth $10 million, what's the distribution of our assets? Oftentimes, we might have a closely held business, or we might have a real estate portfolio, and we may be less than liquid. Okay? So if we just talk through some of the things we need to be paying attention to, at the top of the list is just realizing that liquidity is really oxygen for an estate. And you don't really think about oxygen until it's gone. And then potentially everything is at risk, right? So some of the things to pay attention to is what are the taxes that might be due on that IRA balance, right? You're probably aware that non-spousal IRAs have a 10-year rule for spend down purposes. So what that means is it can be very expensive to transfer an IRA to future generations. If you take myself, for example, my highest wage earning years, the last asset I would want to inherit today would be an IRA. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be upset if I inherit an IRA, but it's going to be the least effective for me. Because the reality is that if an IRA gets inherited to me, I want to put that in my own retirement account. But the reality is I'm going to have to exhaust that account over the next 10 years. I'll be exhausting that at my highest wage earning years as well. And so it becomes very inefficient, and depending on the size of that IRA, might actually push me up into higher brackets. So we have some strategies to really pay attention to understand how can we maximize an IRA. We might even take distributions today, for example, and we might fund a life insurance policy to create what? Liquidity. Life insurance at the very end of the day is a math equation and truly is cash, and it's cash at the time we need it most. So your client may have some wealth, but now death occurs and we trigger some taxes. Might it be nice if we had an injection of cash? So that's just one example. What about any taxes that are due from the federal estate tax or the state estate tax? Well, if you've been paying attention, you understand that the federal estate tax exemption went to 15 million a person, so 30 million in a couple. Well, candidly, that kind of protects most of America and most of the clients that we work with. But a lot of people are forgetting about state income, make that state estate taxes. And so Illinois, for example, where I am, has that pegged at $4 million. So you might have someone who thinks that they're completely fine on that basis, but meanwhile, they may have taxes due on any number above $4 million without the appropriate planning. And so these are things, again, that we need to pay attention to, right? And so what if we have these types of taxes that might be due, but our wealth is illiquid? So then we have to ask ourselves, well, how many acres of land are we going to have to sell to be able to come up with the $1 or $2 or $3 million at death that might be due, right? If our money is in our farmland. Well, which of our properties in our portfolio would we like to liquidate? By the way, we generally need to do this within 9 months after death, certainly from the estate tax side of things. And so now we have the death of a family member, which is emotionally burdensome. Now we have to determine which of our assets we need to sell off perhaps in a fire sale. And that can be very problematic. And again, the liquidity inside of that. What if it's a family business, right? Well, who owns the stock in that family business? How do we effectively buy out the person who's still alive? What happens if the family business has maybe a couple of kids inside of it, but a couple that are outside? So now we're not only talking about liquidity, we're talking about fairness or equalization, right? So hopefully what you're hearing from me is that we may have wealth, but do we have liquidity? And by the way, most people with that type of wealth aren't sitting on $1 million or $2 million in cash. And that's why life insurance being utilized as a guaranteed, non-correlated, income tax-free distribution vehicle can make a lot of sense for clients with wealth. So if you're following me, you might have an objection that might say, yeah, but my clients don't need insurance, Rod. To which I would say, no, they don't need insurance, but they might want insurance if they understood that it can be part of their asset class and it can spring in value at exactly the right time. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone ought to have insurance. What I'm suggesting is everybody ought to consider having insurance by thinking about this process. Okay, and so that can especially be important, as I alluded to, with treating family members fairly and equitably. Maybe one son is going to inherit the farm, for example, but what's going to happen to the other son? And so insurance can be a very good vehicle. And if you're not already familiar with internal rates of return, you can see that at life expectancy in life insurance contracts for fairly healthy people, you may see internal rates of return between 4 and 8%, right? Again, on often a guaranteed basis without having to ride the roller coaster of the market. And by the way, springing at exactly the time that we need. Also remember that life insurance is huge leverage, right? You're buying dollars with pennies. And generically speaking, the earlier death occurs, the more robust the internal rate of return is in the life insurance. So God forbid that you have some early deaths in some of your clients, you might find that the life insurance contract was the best performing asset in the entire portfolio. So just things to pay attention to there. One of the things I'd like to share up with you is a report that Prudential puts together. And this is a generic report that can be catered to any client that you might have. I want to run through this with you. It's a good way to bring this kind of conversation up around estate liquidity and ultimately what does it mean to our legacy, right? And so this is 260-year-olds in the state of Illinois. This is a sampling. You can see this is a 12-page document. I'm going to give you high levels here. So the first thing it does is talk about transfer taxes just in a summary. What are they? I love this because at the end of the day, you kind of have two choices when you ask your clients, well, which would you prefer? Would you like to divide your legacy and your dollars between the family and the government? Or would you like to leave most or even all of your legacy to your family? See, it's not just insurance, it's appropriate estate planning documents. And there's a lot of ways that we can be creative and we can minimize the tax burden. And that's really what this is all about. Then it goes in to describe the federal estate tax and the new laws that just occurred. Here's that $15 million number, which is the applicable exclusion amount for 2026. But any estates that are above that are taxed at potentially 40%. So imagine your client who has a $100 million estate and 30 million is excluded. 60 million is subject to estate taxes, and we may have to pay 40%. Where is that going to come from? And back to those questions, which buildings are we going to liquidate first? How much acres are we going to sell? How much of our business are we going to have to give up? So again, including insurance and an appropriate state plan can help dramatically. It goes in and talks a little bit about the history of estate tax. If you've been around a while, I've been around for 25 years. When I came into this business, it was paid at $675,000. Wow. Well, it's 15 million today. What's going to happen in the future? Don't know. Right? Even though we have this beautiful $15 million mark, which is really protecting so much wealth, there's really no guarantee that that's going to stay, right? It says it's permanent, but anything is subject to change. So not only do we create liquidity by utilizing insurance strategies, but we create additional flexibility. By the way, if estate taxes don't exist and we have this asset, well, it's just even more dollars that go into the heirs. Right? And again, the cash is king. That's a saying for a reason. And it goes into, well, state estate taxes and inheritance. There's 34 states that have no estate tax, but that means the remaining have estate taxes, right? And so here's Illinois. What Illinois is anything above 4 million taxed on a sliding scale between 80 basis points and 16%, right? So somebody worth $10 million might be surprised to know that they might owe $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 of taxes. Estate taxes. By the way, what if that money is in an IRA and it's going to be paid by the kid? And so, and of course, the kid is the 60-year-old physician who inherited the parents' dollars, right? And so now they have to take a distribution from the IRA, creating more taxation, and then be able to effectively net out maybe that $300,000 or $400,000. So again, I'm just impressing upon you that it isn't always about what we have, it's about what we keep, right? We need to have appropriate estate planning documents, an appropriate plan, and we need to consider where insurance can make sense to be able to help in these areas. Okay. Then it goes through the analysis behind it, right? So this is showing two 60-year-olds worth $20 million today, and it's projecting forward what their estate would be 29 years from today, right? And so it's just a nice little flow chart. This is an easy way to walk a client through this kind of conversation. Call it training wheels if you want, but help them sort of understand that, certainly in a flow chart manner. And then it talks about what that distribution would end up looking like. What does the family get? What is paid to the federal government, and what's paid to the state, right? And then behind that, it's giving us definitions of each column, and then it's showing the year-by-year numbers. Some clients love to see the graphs, the charts, and some want to see each number on a year-by-year basis. But again, this is a really great thing to bring awareness. If you've ever heard me talk, I always say that insurance, first and foremost, is about creating awareness and considering what our options are. And a lot of times we don't get there because we say our client doesn't need insurance, and it stops right there. And I think sometimes clients and advisors alike are hiding from the insurance conversation and hiding from the insurance person. And I understand a lot about why that is, but we ought not do that. Insurance, when appropriate, placed is part of the overall portfolio. And if we can look at it that way, again, what we find is that the biggest cases that we end up writing at E4 are generally not because clients strictly need the coverage that we're protecting or that we're providing. It's because they want it, because it makes sense as an asset class that is non-correlated and does things that no other asset class can do. And so people are often throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If we can bring awareness and we can consider, then we can educate and we can make a good decision on what to do moving forward. By the way, if you have clients that have old whole life contracts or old universal life contracts or old variable contracts that you didn't sell them, they're not really sure why they have it, it's not really in that income stream, we really ought to do an insurance review for them. Repositioning old policies is one of the best ways to help improve a client's position. And you can often do that with lowering the premium dollars that they're paying or maybe eliminating them entirely. So to the extent that you need help with that, you certainly reach out to your own RVP or you can reach out to me directly. So once again, this is just showing that year by year. And of course, most things are going out to age 120 nowadays. So you may be aware that age 120 is the actuarial age by which all of us will be dead. Well, they didn't make up that number. When I think of 120, I go, wow, that's crazy. I just don't really believe that I'll get anywhere near that. And maybe I won't, but some of us will. And so what I would also tell you is many of you are running income plans out to age 90 or age 95 on a joint basis. I don't have a problem with that specifically. But what happens if a client lives beyond that? Okay. And that's another reason to have insurance in place on a guaranteed basis all the way to age 120 so that we make sure that a policy outlasts our client. Right? At the end of the day, there's a lot of interesting things that we can do with insurance, but the best insurance product is always one that is actually in force when death occurs. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, the assumptions that we use can all be plugged in. So this is all customizable. Again, it's a piece by Prudential. It can be a really great way to talk about your client's legacy, to talk about their tax burden, and to talk about the liquidity that exists at death. All right, so with that, as we wrap up, I do want to remind you that today's brew, and in fact the entire library, is on our website, which is e4.insurance. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to keep up with the ongoing brewcasts. These come out every single Wednesday. If you haven't paid attention to our website, there's a number of wonderful tools on that website that, again, can help you have better client conversations. So much success in insurance is around identifying the right client and having the right conversation. And E4 and myself are experts in this area of identifying that. We have a lot of great tools to be able to help you with that. And so next week, I'm going to be wrapping up this series, and we're really going to be talking a little more detailed about the biggest threats overall that are going to affect our clients' legacy, right? And we're going to talk about long-term care costs, how important estate planning documents are, the risk that we have in market volatility, family dynamics. If you have a family like my family, maybe it isn't perfect. Well, you're going to find that that's more often the case than not. And so all of these things come together to make sure our clients have the best outcomes. Let's never forget that our job truly is to motivate our clients to operate in their own best interest. And we certainly need to have our eye on legacy planning, liquidity risk, and taking care of the families and the businesses that we serve. You know, our clients work very hard to build their families and their businesses, and we want to be able to ensure that we can protect those. So with that, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week on The Brew.